So my name is Scott Ayat, Manager for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Haworth.
And I am Frances Hoxton. I recently moved into the Vice President role for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Talent Attraction, formerly Vice President of Supply Chain. So a very big shift.
You know, Frances, as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I've heard a lot of it being referenced to mirror work and window work. And as we think about how we apply the ideas of a window and a mirror to how we just interact and see other individuals, I'd like to take a moment and just apply that to us for just a moment. Oh, there it is. I'm going to borrow that.
Here's the clicker. Here, I'll go.
So we talk about our journey to being a globally diverse and inclusively equitable organization. Let's look at the ideas of the mirror and the window. Now, when I apply the window to you, Frances, I see a woman, I see a leader, I see someone who has a background as an immigrant, English being your second language. And so, naturally that leads me to make a lot of assumptions when it comes to your passion and interest, why it ties into diversity, equity, and inclusion. Through a window, you may seem clear, but the person that I see may not be the one in your mirror. So I'd be curious what do you see?
So interesting. The first thing people ask me when I open my mouth, they're like, where are you from, right? So obviously, like you said, I'm a female. I am Latina. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, but there's much more than my physical qualities or aspects. I'm one of 5 children, Latin community, very big families, Catholic in faith. I'm an engineer by background, and I have traveled through my career in different disciplines within engineering, supply chain, materials management, now in HR, so a very interesting journey for me. So, when I see myself, I don't see what Scott sees. That for me is a given. It's really what carries me, my values, my background, my history, my culture.
And just being able to look at the idea of how one will see you versus how we end up seeing ourselves. There's so much more beneath the surface, especially as we put that mirror and we turn that focus in on who we are. When we think about just, our upbringings and where we come from, one thing, I want to share a little story. I was at Trader Joe's the other day, and I heard this young couple, and I think they were getting ready to host their first Thanksgiving, and one of them had picked up a Romanesco. Has anyone ever seen what a Romanesco is, or maybe it's kind of a funky-looking vegetable, perhaps? and that's what their response was. They were asking each other, well, what is this? What do we do with this? Well, I don't really know. Do we cook with it? Do we just, bury it in the ground? What's the purpose of this thing? And so what they ended up doing, I overheard them say, because I was curious and creeping, and they said, well, we're in a hurry, so let's just take this and we're just going to toss it in the oven, we'll slather it in butter, and we'll just, like we would with the broccoli or the potatoes. Fantastic. Now, the thing is, they had no idea what to do with this. They recognized that it looked different, but in lieu of having any more background, they thought, let's just treat it like everything else. And frankly, if I were a guest at their table, that would have been perfectly fine with me, because I'm the person, I don't see vegetables. I don't. Now, on that note, as we think about vegetables, is there a real distinction between something like a potato and something like an onion? Is there? Think about it. You're getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner. What would you rather have piled up on your plate? A nice fluffy pile of mashed potatoes or a nice fluffy pile of mashed onions? They're both the same, are they not? Maybe not so much. When we think about and we treat the onion the same as we would a potato, what do we end up doing? Well, we end up ignoring its own unique characteristics. We end up discounting that which makes it a potato and that which makes it an onion. And ultimately, we fail to allow either vegetable to live up to its full potential. Now, obviously, as we think about this as by way of food preparation, it's a ludicrous way to look at vegetables and fruits and all kinds of food. So it raises the question for us, why do we still today struggle with the idea of, I don't see color? The I don't see color paradox, also known as the Romanesco conundrum, copyright pending. Keep that to yourself, I'm still working out the paperwork. I identify very much with this perspective. I'm part of the Korean diaspora, 7.4 million individuals that were displaced from their homeland. My way was through transracial adoption. I was raised by two white parents from Irish and Polish backgrounds. Love was always a constant. Cultural competency, perhaps not so much. Like the Romanesco, my parents took the approach, and this is the 1980s, so the cultural competency, cultural intelligence was still in its infancy. But my parents took the approach of, well, like the Romanesco, it looks a little different. Don't really know, how to come at it from a cultural competency. We're just going to treat it like he was our child anyway, raise it in love. And it's a lovely sentiment with incredibly good intentions, but the fact of the matter is what it resulted in for me personally was a cultural identity crisis of sorts, being able to see two different perspectives, two different worlds, and not aligning in perfectly with either. As we think about the importance of an upbringing an environment can take, this is where it leads us into some incredible leading practices and observations as it relates to DEI and how organizations play out. And I want you to look at the image of a fish tank, if you will. We're familiar with fish tanks. We've probably had them at some point in our lives, and they're designed to, you fill it with water and you put the fish in there. It's designed to host a wild variety of marine life. The question becomes, what if I take a saltwater fish tank and I dump a whole batch of goldfish in there? What do you think is going to happen to them? Not going to last terribly long, I'd imagine. And when we think about the idea of the fish tank, it goes to show the environment is so incredibly important, has such a vital impact on the individuals and the life that's actually being sustained in there. As a DEI leader, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to work with a number of organizations and to be able to interact with a number of other leaders. And I've taken notice of just some common themes or reasons why DEI efforts tend to fail. Now, organizations by and large have usually no problem recognizing when they are not terribly diverse or when they're terribly homogenous. The idea of not seeing color is actually quite true because there may not be a lot of color to see. But usually what happens when they have that moment of blazing clarity that they're not terribly diverse is that there's an immediate drive to go on a diversity recruiting bender. We're going to hire as many people that do not look like us, that come from different backgrounds. We're going to put them in a position, and we're going to call this mission accomplished. But like with the fish tank example, we've dumped the goldfish into the saltwater tank, and we wonder why they're not lasting very long. There's oftentimes a myopic focus on the needs of today as opposed to really thinking about what are our needs from a talent-wise, aligning with our DEI strategy in the long term. Not to mention the fact that I think there's no secret, there is a scramble, a frenzy for talent, dare I say a war on talent right now. So the needs of today have never been magnified or been more present than they are today. And lastly, there's oftentimes an unclear assessment of what our current state is. And furthermore, leading to the question of what is it that we ultimately want to accomplish? It brings me to one of my favorite quotes: prescription absent diagnosis is malpractice. Do we understand from a DEI perspective the full scope of this situation, what it is that we're trying to do, understanding where our pain points are, and how do we want to begin to advance that? The solutions that we are implementing, are they rooted in what the data is reflecting, or are we just implementing quick fixes that are ultimately perpetuating the problem we're trying to solve? And also, are the perceptions that we have, are they aligned with and rooted in reality based on what the data is actually showing? As we think about some of the reasons why DEI efforts fail, it's really being able to make the distinction of a strategic versus a tactical approach, and really asking that question of what it is ultimately that we want to accomplish, and how is it that we're going to end up getting there. As we look at one of the ways that we're focusing on around DEI, it's being able to shift the attention away from the talent attraction piece. While it's incredibly important, no doubt, our work is not ended quite yet. But recognizing that DEI has to be holistic in its implementation. As we look at the employee life cycle model, ELC and DEI working together, how an organization is positioning itself from a talent attraction standpoint, from an audience perspective, how we go about onboarding individuals, our recruitment and talent acquisition process, as we think about the ways we develop and reward our employees to help them move around and grow within an organization. We want to make sure that as we're looking at each of these stages that they serve as strategic areas of focus around where we can embed diversity, equity, and inclusion all around to have that cascade approach. We talk about Haworth and what we're doing on our DEI journey. I'll turn it over to Francis to articulate that in greater detail.
You're doing such a great job. I love his voice. He has such great projections, so bear with me. I'll give you a little bit of a perspective about Haworth. I've been actually with Haworth 10 years. As I stated earlier, I started in supply chain, and my involvement and engagement with diversity was from a supplier diversity standpoint. So I did a lot of work with partnering with diverse suppliers, engaging, learning with them, developing them, et cetera. And one of the things that I learned in coming into this new role is that diversity from a supplier standpoint, diversity from a personal standpoint, diversity on talent attraction standpoint, there's a core set of values that remains throughout all of those facets. So our belief as an organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion is diversity or inclusion is encouraging belonging. Belonging. I've been with Haworth 10 years, and I would tell you that one of the things that has kept me at Haworth in Michigan is that great sense of belonging. I moved from North Carolina, by the way. I didn't know anybody in Michigan when I moved to Michigan, and I will tell you that this is where I have raised my kids, and it has been a great, great environment. One that is, I would say, it's not the most diverse, but from an inclusion standpoint, I have been extremely welcome and provided a great environment to belong. Equity, you want to ensure that there's opportunity for everybody equally through different policies, processes, and workspaces and places. And then diversity is really about embracing differences and acknowledging those differences. Those three values are very integral within the Haworth DNA, whether you're working in design, whether you're working with a customer, whether you're working with a supplier, whether you're working with talent. Those are deeply rooted in how we conduct business. So a little bit of a historical perspective. Haworth is a privately held company founded in 1948 in West Michigan, Holland. And over the years, it'll be 75 years soon, we have expanded our footprint from a sales standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, globally. As you can see, we have progressed. We started in the US, we expanded in Canada, Germany, Asia Pacific. We're actually, within our industry, the first office furniture manufacturer that had presence in Asia Pacific. So what we have learned about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it's not the North America recipe of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is we really have to have a global lens on how do we understand those concepts. How are they different by region? How are they different even within a country, a county, even within the US, as you can imagine? US being such a great big country, there are differences in how diversity, equity, and inclusion are interpreted. So we're on a journey, even though we are a close to 75 plus years of being founded, we're still on a journey of learning how do we complement diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we grow and we learn. And what happens, right? Every so many years, the world changes on us. We heard about it earlier. The change is the new norm. So we're now also trying to figure out how do we embrace these changes in ensuring that we continue to drive a mentality and a culture of acceptance, inclusion, and diversity. So how are we approaching it at Haworth? Understanding that diversity, equity, and inclusion, it impacts all of us, and it impacts our business, and deeply rooted on our values, on D&I values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are taking an approach more holistic, but we also have to be organized. We can't just try to solve our hunger and shoot from the hip. So we have organized our journey into what we call the 5 pillars of DE&I within Haworth. One that aims to understand the member diversity, not only in the US, not only in Asia Pacific, but globally. One that aims at understanding how do we garner, how do we benefit, how do we enrich our lives by developing and partnering with suppliers that are diverse. I'll give you a little story on the supplier diversity, because being in supply chain and driving supplier diversity, I was one saying, for me, it's not about checking the box to see how many suppliers are diverse. You know, we have great partners that are not diverse by definition. However, it is our goal to ensure that they are driving diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organization. So we started to change the language within our group to not really keep a metric up to say, check the box, here's how many suppliers are diverse, but really, how are we changing the community? And we're working with suppliers to ensure that they're driving diversity in a very similar fashion that we are at Haworth. Designer diversity. Designers are the ones that are developing the products, listening to what our customers want. And we need to ensure that the designers that we are reaching out to understand the differences in the market. Traditionally, we had a very male-dominated environment of designers. We have, through acquisitions that we have made at the organization, we have expanded that reach of designers to really understand the different aspects of what design criteria is. In addition to it, we have shifted from a business-to-consumer, business-to-business model, and we're expanding into the business-to-consumer model. So understanding the different requirements of a consumer versus a company or a factory is really, really important. So we are reaching out to developing more rigorous and meaty plans around designer diversity or design diversity. Dealer diversity, the way we go to market is through dealerships. So although now we're expanding into the business to consumer, so now we're going directly to customers through the e-commerce, but the big part of our business is through dealers. So we rely on them to translate our vision, but we also rely on them on learning what's happening out in the marketplace. So the dealer diversity combined with the designer diversity gives us that wealth of knowledge of what's happening out there so that we're more conscientious of what's happening. Lastly, community involvement. One of the greatest things that I admire about our organization, particularly of our founders and chairman, Dick Haworth, Matthew Haworth, Franco Bianchi, is that the reason we exist is to ensure that we have a future for our future generations. They are extremely conscientious in ensuring that we leave a place that our generations are going to live by. And ensuring that the communities that we serve grow with us is extremely important. So we could not do diversity, equity, and inclusion without looking at the lens of the communities that we serve. Communities worldwide, communities in India. We have factories in India. We have members in India, factories in Europe, factories in Canada. We want to make sure that we are understanding and serving those communities as well and learning from them. Without them, we don't have a future. I stated earlier, if we don't look at DE&I from a global perspective, we're going to miss the boat. And it's not just purely because we're a global company, but it's because we are so dependent in what happens to us from a global, worldwide standpoint. So it's important, it's critical. Oh, by the way, we don't have it all figured out. It's a journey. We are all trying to figure it out and get there together.
You told me to have it all figured out last week.
2 months into the role, no. 2 months ago, I said, oh yeah, piece of cake. 2 months into the role, I said, Scott, I'm probably the worst person to be here because I have all these experts, including yourself. So I'm humbled by being surrounded by all of you, but reality is no, it's not all figured out. Want to take that?
Haworth as a culture, we recognize that it's the collective, holistic efforts of all of our touch points, our constituents, our customers, our members, the communities greater that we serve, which really makes our DEI journey propelled and pushed forward. We are because of who we are. Our vision is to be able to create a space where everyone is not just feels that they know that they belong, but they genuinely know, they genuinely believe that they have an integral part to play at our organization. We want to create an environment, and what our vision is to have everyone know and feel empowered, that they're recognized for their individual values, so that we can really not only celebrate and join in the ways that we are similar, but we can identify and cherish and embrace how we are different as well. And it's through being able to create that environment where everyone knows that they can be their genuine, true, authentic self, that they can share their gifts, share their perspectives, share their values with the rest of us, and collectively, we can then gain strength through that sharing. We want to be able to make sure that we can take a proactive approach in tackling bias, where we can have leaders that are culturally intelligent as well as being able to work with all of their teammates, with their subordinates, with their partners, from a lens of empathy and being able to drive it with a sense of appreciative inquiry. We want to be able to harness how we are different as well as similar, recognizing that is the driving force behind what innovation truly is. And ultimately, in line with our values, we want to be able to reflect the diverse people that we are serving, and at the end of the day, make the world a better place.